What's up guys, I'm Lee Morris with Fstoppers.com, and today we're going to be talking about lens compression. In fact, I'm going to show you how lens compression doesn't exist at all. Big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Now we've all seen animations like this before using zoom lenses. To create this animation, what I did was I got really close in Patrick's face with a 15mm lens. I backed up, and as I backed up, I zoomed in with a range of different lenses, and then I stabilized everything in post-processing to get this really interesting effect. As you can see, when I'm very close to Patrick's face, you can't see the gazebo behind him at all. And then as I back up and zoom in, the gazebo becomes humongous, so big in fact that we can actually see all the way through it. Now this animation may prove to you that lens compression does exist, but I actually want to show you that it's not the lens producing this look at all. It's actually the distance of the camera from the subject and from the background. Now I'm going to prove this to you in two different ways. The first way is the easiest. First of all, I'm going to set David up in front of the exact same gazebo. I'm going to back up and zoom in with a 400mm lens. Here's what that shot looks like. Now without moving, I'm going to throw on a 24-70mm lens, and I'm going to shoot at 24mm. As you can see, we have a much wider looking shot here, but if I crop in to create the exact same field of view, you'll notice that these shots line up exactly. All of the distortion that you would assume that you would have with the 24mm lens is completely non-existent if we crop into the middle of the frame. So let's talk about what's actually happening here and why lens compression doesn't really exist, but perspective distortion does exist. Let's say that this first shot that I took of Patrick, I'm approximately 1 foot away from his face. But let's say I'm 50 feet away from the gazebo behind him. As I move back just 1 foot away from Patrick's face, now instead of 1 foot, I'm 2 feet away, Patrick's head size in relation to the frame will drop 50%. It will be half the size as it was. But the gazebo is remaining approximately the same size, because for me to half the size of the gazebo, I would have to move 50 feet back. Now, as I keep moving back, once I actually hit 50 feet away from where I started, the gazebo is now half the size, but Patrick is 50 times smaller. So the animation that I created is a little misleading because it appears that Patrick is remaining the same size while the gazebo is growing. But in reality, what's happening is both the gazebo and Patrick are shrinking down. Patrick is just shrinking down at a much faster rate. And then we're zooming in or cropping in to compensate for that. The relationship between your camera, your subject, and the background is what's creating this perspective distortion or warping. Now, the same thing that's happening with Patrick and his relation to the gazebo behind him is also happening on his face. You'll notice in the first few shots where I'm very close to him, his nose looks gigantic and his ears look really small. And that's because the distance from his nose to the camera is exponentially closer than from his ears to the camera. So now I want to prove this to you in one other way. So we're going to actually do the opposite. I'm going to try to get a wide angle looking shot by stitching images together using a standard zoom lens. Let's see if we can pull this off. To illustrate this next point, I'm going to be photographing this old rusty bike of mine. Now, I've taken a standard shot of this bike where I step back and zoomed in. It just looks like a normal bike. But when I get really close and I zoom way out, I'm at 15mm right now, you can see just how distorted this bike looks. This back tire specifically is just stretched out in this frame, and these tires don't look like circles at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the camera in exactly the same spot, and I'm going to swap this lens out for a 24-70, and let's see if we can get a similar looking shot by stitching a bunch of images together. All right, so I'm going to zoom into 70mm here, and this may take a lot of different shots. But let's go ahead and try to stitch this together. Now, as you can see, when we bring all of these files into Photoshop, we're not going to get a flawless stitch, but you will notice that the perspective of these two shots is the exact same. And again, the reason that this is happening is because the lens itself is not creating the distortion. It's the distance from the camera to the subject itself. Now, some lenses do actually have distortion issues, but that's a very different thing than perspective distortion. Most photographers assume that wide-angle lenses are bad for portraits because those lenses create distortion, when in reality, it's not the lenses at all, it's the fact that you're so close to your subject. Now, I already know what the #1 comment on YouTube will be, and that's, "This is so ridiculous, everybody knows this information, what are you saying, you don't need zoom lenses, we can just shoot everything with a wide angle lens." Of course not. Of course I'm not suggesting that. We all need zoom lenses to get the correct composition without having to crop in and lose resolution, or without having to take a 30 image pano like I've done here with this bike. The reason that I created this video is that most photographers do not understand how this is working. We actually did a poll about this over a year ago, and more than 50% of photographers believed that the lens itself was creating the distortion rather than the distance from the camera to the subject. So at the end of the day, this may not change the way you shoot at all, but hopefully you'll have a new understanding of what's actually happening when you back up and shoot the exact same subject. But maybe in the future, we should stop using the term lens compression and instead use perspective compression. Once again, guys, this video is brought to you by Squarespace. If you don't know what Squarespace is, definitely check them out. If you're looking for a website, it's one of the easiest ways to build your own custom website without any web development training whatsoever. Now, as photographers, of course, we all need a website. If you're thinking about hiring somebody to design your own website, you may want to check out Squarespace first. For just a few bucks a month, you can design the website yourself. You can make it exactly how you want, and I can guarantee it's going to be endlessly cheaper than trying to pay somebody to do it custom for you. To save 10% on your first purchase, head over to squarespace.com/fstoppers. And if you'd like to check out our full-length photography tutorials, you can head over to fstoppers.com/store.